Hello, everybody, and welcome to Storytelling, Philosophy, and Reception. Today we have Carly Silver Feldman, public historian and editor. Welcome, Carly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And today we're doing something completely different because Carly is going to be interviewing me for a change.
And I have to say, Bettina, I've known you for a long time, and going through the extraordinary variety and the breadth and depth of your achievements was really quite humbling and also really inspiring. It was tremendous.
Humbling, coming from you, that's wow. I mean, thank you. I'm very touched and honored by what you're saying. So kind, so kind. Well, ask me
You're,
anything.
yes, well, one of the things that really struck me was your obviously passion and skill at music and playing music, reconstructing music. And I was also really intrigued by the depth and breadth of the different musical and dance traditions that you've engaged in. So I want to start with a really seemingly basic question, but one that I think would speak to the different traditions that you've worked across. So, why is music such an excellent lens through which we can discuss and learn about archaeology and classics?
Because people have been singing from the beginning of time, it seems. In no tradition can I think of where people weren't singing. Like it's always comes up that they've sung, whether to pass down stories, which is the actual, that seems to be a thing too everywhere, but to comfort each other, to comfort children, babies, and so it's something, it's an expression, it's a human expression as old as speaking. And for myself, I've been apparently singing since before I was speaking words. So to me, that the music came before the talking, and so that really resonates with me. That music is something we need to be always talking about, and it's really the best lens to talk about Homer, since Homer was sung. Oral tradition was actually singing tradition.
And in listening to some of the wonderful music that you have available to stream, I was wondering, how do you get your voice to go so high in certain places? Now, I am not a singer, God knows, but how is that something that you naturally have with different registers in that way, or is it a skill that you've developed over the years?
Um, the skill has declined over the years, but at its height, when I was actually taking opera singing lessons in college, I had a singing voice of 3 octaves, um, and it was a solid 3 octaves of singing. But now I have a solid 2.5 of singing, and which is which is not really common. Um, and Yeah, and it's great because when I'm playing notes, I'm singing along in my head, which a lot of musicians don't. They don't have that luxury because so they're playing, but they're not singing in their heads. And whereas I can do that, and therefore the lyrics are already happening um, in my head as I'm playing notes, and and I used to ask myself, does that like actually how does that work with ancient music, with ancient Greek music, Egyptian music, or what have you? Did they sing that high? And then looking at the ancient music, the documents of ancient Greek music that I had, I mean, it was showing that the registers were actually, it looks like it's about 2 octaves sometimes. So I stopped asking, like, were they singing like that? Like, it seems like they do. And when you listen to just traditional music around the world, they certainly do, especially the melismas going up and down, up and down. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm not even going to ask whether or not they sang it, or whether that's just like an opera tradition that Western music developed. It's like, no, that had been around for so long, and probably Western music actually was part of that tradition, not the other way around.
So I'm actually going to ask that dovetails really nicely with a different question I had that I'm going to now switch the order I want to ask because um, so your scholarship really beautifully balances artistic reimagining and historical analysis of whether it's artifacts, traditions, any number of different areas. And I think it has led in many cases to different ways to consider classics and archaeology. I was wondering, how do you balance the recreation or reimagining versus working with the ancient data? And do you ever prioritize one over the other, and why?
That is a really interesting question because I think I'm just very immersed in the world in general, and that's how I approach the ancient world. So everything is all together. It's all culture. So culture to me is music, art, textile, and maybe I'm a very sensory person. That is something many people have pointed out to me, that I have to be able to touch it or imagine that I'm touching things. The natural world that they lived in, what they ate, what they smelled, all those things seemed to me from the beginning obvious that I had to study all of that. And you can't study that without history and archaeology. I mean, that is all one thing. And so I always kept going across whenever I was curious about anything at all. Theater, I had to think, okay, who does archaeology of theater? Like, can anyone tell me about the sound of theater? Can anyone tell me what did people do on the way to the theater? What did they do after? Like, all those questions were always one thing to me, never separate, which made things harder sometimes, I suppose, to study, or it would take longer, or it would just it seems more complicated maybe, or when I think about writing a paper, and I remember in grad school it would be like a focus only on one question, and I thought, how do you do that? I'm having a harder problem asking that when everything is so integrated. How do I isolate only one thing? Okay, I guess I will, but that doesn't feed my curiosity actually. It never will. And so from early on I was so interested in everybody's ideas, and I would go across different fields all the time, making friends with people across different fields to find out answers to my questions. And Carly, when I was a little girl, there were three things I wanted to be. And it didn't turn out that way as I got older, but I wanted to be either a psychologist, a writer slash poet, or a piano teacher.
Hmm.
And I my first bachelor's was psychology, and I had been writing poetry since I was 9 years old, and I was like imitating the rhythm of Edgar Allan Poe, and sort of that gothic, darkness. Yes, I was a dark, gothic child. um, and um, and then my second major, when I realized I did not want to be a psychologist, was music, because I'd been doing music since I was like 3 years old or whatever, and I did piano. That was I went in there studying classical piano, and then I injured my hand. A piano cover fell on my hand. That was majorly tragic. So they didn't quite know what to do with me. So they were like, you might want to explore other things. And that's when I went into opera and harp studies. It turned out that I managed to get through the last year of piano. Anyway, I still graduated piano, but my left hand kept going numb. Numb, completely numb. Like I could not feel it. There was nothing in my hands, nothing. For like a year, in and out, it would be like that. It was a really interesting and horrible time, but it made me rethink many things and appreciate different ways to express myself. And then my third major was English Lit, because at that point I thought music was the hardest one. Music took up so much time. We had to do performances, we had to do compositions in University of California in Irvine. And finally I did English Lit because I thought, okay, I did all that. I think I would like to make poetry and write short stories and do an MFA. And I think that's what I want to do. But I was encouraged to do comparative lit PhD instead, and so I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. But first, I'll be a piano teacher for many years, because it seemed like such a wonderful way to be helping helping other people explore their musical expression. And I love playing piano, and I could help kids and adults play piano. It seemed great. I also was at that point doing world dance, and I was also teaching little kids hula and adults also. It was all good, you know. And then I stumbled across a Latin summer school one day. So Latin didn't come until college, until after the three majors. Yeah, yeah. And it came easily to me, and I think it's because I had, my grandmother spoke Spanish and two dialects, Filipino dialects and English. So she'd been talking since I was little. And so there was already that, and I'd explored other languages, of course, in throughout elementary, middle school, English, French. French was my third language, I guess, or maybe my fourth. And so Latin to me was easy. It was hard. What was hard was ancient Greek. That was hard.
That's fascinating. And I'm curious, did the experience with opera in particular, I mean, obviously you learn a bit of Italian, whether or not you're taking Italian classes. Did that also help with the Latin?
Oh, absolutely. So I think the Spanish and Italian absolutely helped with Latin. And just my awareness of English in general, I was always analyzing words anyway. And I was like, I'd look up etymology of this word. Oh, dictionary. Oh, it's from the Latin. Oh, nice. The word metamorphosis. Oh, it's actually Greek. Oh, okay. But it means the same as transformation, which is Latin etymology, oh, how interesting. And those are part of our English language. And I picked up some Irish as well, and apparently more Southern Irish than Northern Irish. So because I was thinking, what else is English made of? There's French. Okay, I already learned that. That was actually a minor of mine in college. I ended up teaching French for a whole year in high school, actually. Yeah. So there's all these little side quests that happened in existence. So I don't mean to be meandering from your questions, Carly, but as I've said, everything has always been integrated with me. It seems like there was never just one path. It seems like I'm always holding hands with a bunch of other things as I walk that path.
I think that's beautifully said. And that was one of the things that I think you and I maybe initially connected over was we both have deep roots in classics, but we also have other passions that we've explored, whether it's careers or hobbies or things like that, that we sort of will take bits and pieces from and connect that to classics, and other ways just sort of find ways to follow your passion, whether it's professionally, personally, in different ways. I mean, again, my language skills are not nearly that. I've got English and a smattering of Spanish, but I think, again, the that seems like a very natural evolution from your curiosity in lots of different languages and a lot of different fields as well. So your most recent work, which is now available to stream online, and I highly recommend it, recreates Helen's presence in the Odyssey, Book 15. And I think that if I'm not mistaken, the lines in particular that you're discussing include Helen's interpretation to Telemachus of the famous omen, the bird omen of Odysseus' eventual return and destruction of the suitors. I was curious, what made you want to choose that particular passage? And how do you interpret Helen at that point in the story? Because we see lots of different Helens in the Odyssey. And how do you get into her head at that point? It's a fascinating way it's a fascinating time to meet her. And she's never not an interesting character, right? But it's also really, having to embody her at that stage, I imagine, is an interesting challenge.
Helen, I thought of as a foil to Odysseus because she had been wanting to go home since the Iliad. When we meet her in the Iliad, she tells Aphrodite, her half-sister, I want to go home to Menelaus. And Aphrodite says, it was the night before the one-on-one fight between Menelaus and Paris, which, can you imagine? I mean, Helen wants to go home to her husband Menelaus, who's fighting for her against this dude she doesn't want anymore. And in fact, she says something to Aphrodite like, if you love him so much, you go marry him, or something like that. And Aphrodite says, excuse me, I'm a goddess. And then I think Helen is put in her place. And Aphrodite says, you have to be with your husband tonight. And he needs you most of all tonight. And I thought, gross, ew. Can you imagine? She wants to be with her true husband. In her mind, her true husband, Menelaus. And she has to comfort this guy. I mean, and she had to put up with that, So whatever happened, whether she was kidnapped or coerced by Aphrodite, or somehow she had been in love with Paris at one point and followed him, by the 10th year, she absolutely didn't want to be there anymore. And so she'd been wanting a return. She had been wanting that nostos, like Odysseus. And so I was thinking that when she saw Telemachus and she said, and she recognized him right away, that you are the son of Odysseus, you look like your father. She must have been so excited, like she wished there was something she could say to comfort him. And so when that bird omen came to her, because that strange bird thing was going on, and people asked Menelaus the king, what does that mean? She said, I will tell you what it means. And she started speaking to Telemachus. She must have been so excited to be the one to tell him, your father is coming home, or he is already home, and he is right now avenging everyone. I mean, Telemachus had been on this quest for like how many, 15 books, trying to figure out, where's my dad? And she's the one that answered. So I thought that is a powerful moment, and that has to happen. We have to give that to her, and whoever wrote the Odyssey gave that moment to her. So it's really quite astounding. And before that moment, there was book 4, so she's in the Odyssey twice, in book 4 and in book 15. In book 15, she is giving Telemachus a present, like for his future bride, but this is an even bigger present when this happened, So I thought that was great. We find out in the Odyssey that she and Menelaus kind of have a second honeymoon, like on the way back from Troy. They stop by Egypt, they stop in other places, and she learned medicines from the Egyptians, which is why in book 4 she gave some sort of medicinal something to everybody to calm them down, so she learned things from the Egyptians, and perhaps she learned prophecy also from them, because there's a very famous place in Egypt where people went to learn prophecy, or to have an oracle. So she's such a fascinating person. So here's a powerful half goddess who can give herbs and soothe people, like Circe used herbs, but she was using to soothe people, not to transform anybody. And she had powers of prophecy, and Telemachus did not have to go, like Odysseus' father, to the underworld to get this. So, I mean, here she is, she's giving it. And she got her wish. She's, after everything, was home with her husband in her wonderful own homeland, and her daughter, we learn in Odyssey 4, is getting married to Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, or they're preparing for that. And Menelaus himself has a son from another woman, and they're preparing something for him as well. So she is spinning, and she is being just a mother and a wife and a queen, all her roles, and also part goddess. and she's an amazing character. And I have to say, I was really sad that the movie didn't treat her that way. Not that movie, nor in Troy did they treat her to be the astounding individual that she is. But I wanted to give her something that was huge and powerful, and that was and this is just volume 1. My album was Odyssey and Iliad volume 1, and I started it with Iliad 1 and ended it with Odyssey 24, and she's somewhere in there with the Odyssey portion. And I had at one point thought for the volume one, should I include her lament to Hector? And I thought, no, that'll wait till volume two. I want to first introduce her to people with something powerful and not just the person lamenting Hector, you know.
That's an interesting point because in your own way, you were recreating and recreating the character of Helen, which of course everyone who interprets or, whether it's as as a writer, as a movie, or just engaging with the text has a different Helen in mind. And I could so see that Helen, who I think may come out a little more powerfully in historical, these many of these mythic adaptations that are great novels, for example. Maybe she comes out a little more strongly. But you use this word that I think is so evocative, is spinning, right? And in that way, of course, we end up seeing her consciously or unconsciously, another connection to cousin Penelope, as it were. And I think that's such an interesting. I really appreciate the way you inhabit her as a character in order to get there, because to get that, to not only choose the portion that you want to set to music, but to inhabit her as a character, almost as if you're a character actor, because I think that makes the music that much more evocative and emotional. Is that when you are choosing a passage to set to music, or is that part of your typical process to inhabit that character? How do you explore them, and do you limit yourself to, say you're working with the Iliad or Odyssey, do you limit yourself to these poems? As you mentioned, sort of Helen's lament as one aspect, or do you look into some of the other traditions to draw inspiration?
When working with Homer, I'm trying to strictly base it on Homer, whether it's epic cycles or the Iliad and the Odyssey. Um, if I'm doing like a specific work, like something from Euripides, then I would be working from that century and backwards because they had the knowledge of both. But I don't want to work forwards, so I'm just working with what they have, um, what we have that they had. We're assuming that was finally written down, and when inhabiting a character, I have to be true to myself, um, in some ways, but try to only as far as what seems to be archetypally the same and probably the same in a human way throughout time, but try to leave behind like the modern me, you know? So I'm trying not to lend such a feminist viewpoint or whatever when I was like thinking about Penelope, for instance, when I did Penelope lamenting, I didn't want to make her like this sort of enraged Penelope or whatever. Um, I did, interestingly enough, choose the sad Penelope um, for this first album, but it's actually a not, I wouldn't say an empowering moment, but it is an interesting moment of stillness because Penelope is has not had the luxury of being alone. She's surrounded by suitors. She has so many duties. When we see her in the Odyssey, she's trying to raise a son without a father. She's trying to be uh, not quite. Is she trying to be a queen? That's always a good question, right? She seems to be trying to be queen, without a king by her side. And she is, of course, from the royal household, or at least a noble household that Helen is part of, right? Helen of Sparta, because Menelaus married her to become king of Sparta. So Penelope, we don't really know so much the background of Penelope. At least I don't. Maybe I have to just reread some stuff in the Iliad, and I didn't quite get it. But I know she is of the royal or noble household. So she is used to duties that she has to do. She knows her duties and she's performing them. But when is she just herself? She could have been herself when her husband was around for, and we don't know how long he was around for, right? I mean, sadly, he was around Calypso probably longer than he was with Penelope.
That's such an interesting point and a really because yeah, it does beg the question, well, begs so many questions in interpretation, right? Is I've never thought about it like that. And
How long
yeah,
did she have with her husband? And to make her so loyal though, like was was it loyalty out of duty, loyalty from some sort of passionate love? What compelled her to keep saying no, not until, you know, not until he comes home, or not until my son has a beard, because that's what we had agreed on. I mean, astounding again. And I'm using that word again for the cousins, the two cousins here, Helen and Penelope, these two queens. Um, when did she have space to just be herself? So, okay, in the Odyssey, for a moment, we see her just collapse on her bed and just let herself go and mourn the fact that she just wants to die at this point. She just wants to weep and she's sad. But this is her only space to be sad, because in the next scene, her women come in. So she doesn't even have that long of a time to have a moment to just be her. And I'm sure, when at the end of the Odyssey, when she's with her husband, we have to imagine that, oh, she's finally happy, a happy Penelope for a little moment of time. How long is that stretch before Odysseus has to go off on his other journey again, right? Or whatever. So I just wanted a moment where Penelope was alone and she could just feel something that's not a feeling about trying, oh, what shall I do with a household? Or what shall I do about Telemachus? But just simply, gosh, this is how I feel right now. And I really wish that she had a musical instrument that she that she could play to express herself with, but she doesn't have it. She doesn't. So I started when I thought of Penelope, I think of her weaving, and I know that they have big looms and they're vertical, but that movement always, something with her fingers, right? So I'm thinking, gosh, that would apply so well to a lyre, wouldn't it? So it was easy for me to imagine something like that. And then the movement of the waves always in the background, so it's do 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 do, with the rhythm of her weaving. And that's how I started the song for Penelope. The idea of the ocean always in the background, always there, because it's an island, and the movement of her fingers. It has to be rhythmic, and then just this moment that she can express herself. And there in volume 2, I'll find another place where sounds a bit more powerful. But for this one, I just thought, in many ways, isn't it a moment really of, it's not empowerment, but what is it that I'm trying to say? It is something to have that moment for yourself when you haven't had a moment at all throughout the book.
wow, that is incredibly powerful. I think that's that's fascinating. And again, I so appreciate the depth of thought. I mean, the way you picked out the moment, the precision with that moment, and how would she, not just how would she feel, but how does the spinning potentially mirror an instrument? And, is such a beautiful example of the way that music and classical reception can connect. And I'd be curious to know, you've gotten into the heads, and because you really do, again, this is where your psychology background is clear. You not psychoanalyze, but you really think about the way that you get into their heads, into these mythological characters' heads, and you really help embody them as people through music. What was the hardest mythological? I mean, I suppose it could, be if you've done, people. I know you've done Sappho, who was a real person, but who was the hardest figure's head to get into, and who was the one that you related to most? If you had to look back on these various songs you put together over the years.
That's an excellent question. And I always have to be true to myself, and I can't approach a character until I feel that I have felt I can actually empathize, not just sympathize, but actually empathize with the moment, right? Um, Currently, I think the hardest one for me to embody is Nausicaa because I don't remember anymore. It's been so long since I was such an innocent young girl, smitten with the idea of like being married. and so I would have to interview people who have women like yourself who just who has newly been married or happily married, and ask them like, how did it feel like that moment when you're looking and you every male that you see, might be the one, like, or not every, but like you meet somebody and that potentially might be the one, like Nausicaa seeing Odysseus. She's thinking that could be the guy, that could be the one, that could be the reason why I had that dream. Like, oh my gosh, I think that would be a harder character for me now to play than it was, when I started doing this. The other one that was difficult was actually Calypso because I actually really liked that musical Epic. Have you heard like songs from Epic?
I have, and I think it's again just another really example of a way to musically engage and express those great traditions.
I like the playful way, but also the sympathetic way that they had written Calypso. But what I wanted to embody was Calypso saying goodbye. And how different is that from saying goodbye, from Circe saying goodbye? It has to be different. How are these two goddesses different from each other in their love for Odysseus? And the first thing that comes to mind is that there's that line where it said something like Odysseus was weeping because Calypso no longer pleased him, which meant at some point she did please him. Okay? So it was mutual at some point. We don't know how long, but it was. And we know it said something like every night he was with her, but then he'd go and weep. Okay, that would have been really sad indeed if at some point she had not pleased him. But okay, so Odysseus, you had somehow made her feel that you liked her enough to stay or to be with her every single night, and now you're weeping. And what is she supposed to think about this weeping all the time? Is she thinking, well, okay, I mean, he's missing his loved ones at home. This will pass because it's passed before. Like, what kind of Calypso are we talking about? Is she so cold that she's just thinking of her own selfish desires this entire time for 7 years or however long she no longer pleased him? How long? So I have to think, there is a story and I have to decide on this story. I have to decide at what point did she no longer please him? At what point did she know that she's not the one for him? Did she accept it? What kind of Calypso are we dealing with here? Whereas Circe was a little bit easier in many ways because it was like an enchantment. It was sex. Yes, I'll turn them back into men if you have sex with me one night. And then he stays for a whole year. So that was a real decision on his part. He could have left any time, right, for Circe. But with Calypso, we don't know what her powers were. We know that somehow he hasn't gone, but is it only because he's just depressed because he has had PTSD? He has nobody now. He doesn't have his men like he did in Circe. When he was with Circe, he had his men. He could go. But this time he doesn't have anybody, so is he just feeling so bereft, so alone? What kind of relationship did they have? So this took me years to try to tackle this one, because there's so many questions and I have to create the answer to all this. So I had to make decisions. So I decided that Odysseus was a broken man and she helped him out and he was grateful and he was in love with her because he had accepted that he cannot go home, because how can he? He can't build a ship. By the way, that's a weird one right there, because if I were alone on an island that was filled with everything I want, including lots of trees back there, and here's a goddess who can weave, because we find her always weaving. She's weaving, she's singing, she's happy. The first thing I'd be like, after I've gotten out of my grieving or sorrows or something, maybe a year later, is take a breath and go, hey, honey, I was thinking maybe I could try building a raft, And then I'll try a raft, and it'll take me a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and then build a bigger thing, and then try to build a ship, and then. So why didn't he do that? I mean, 7 years for a clever man, the kind of clever man that, did that side quest with Diomedes and stole something with him, and the kind of man that thought up the Trojan horse. He can't figure out how to make a ship after 7 years? I mean, not even a raft, nothing at all. So I had to decide that he was just so broken and so upset that he just wasn't helping himself at all. So it's all her. She's cooking. He's not even helping cook. So he's just kind of just being him. And she's like, all right, you just be you. And I love you and you love me in your own way. And that's fine. And when Hermes came and said, you have to let him go. And she's like, oh my gosh, we're like, why? I love him. And okay. But she doesn't scream at him. She's just she gets upset and she says her monologue, and then she goes, fine. And then she goes to Odysseus and says, no tricks. Let's just talk. You and me talk. And I'm going to tell you that you can go. And at first he says something like, I don't want any of your tricks. So there was tricks of some sort. We don't know what kind of tricks these are. Are these just what are these argument tricks as he's talking about, as in the kind of head tricks people say when they have arguments with each other, that kind of tricks? What kind of tricks? And she says, no tricks, just, do you want to go home? And he says, yes, I do. And then she says, okay, well, if you want to go home to your homeland, well, then fare you well. And she says that. She says, then fare you well. But I want you to know that you will, if only you knew what sort of tragic stuff will happen between now and the time you go home, you would stay with me and be immortal. And that's the only time she says that. And yet, that's the one that people remember her saying, is that everybody remembers that she bribed Odysseus with, if you stay, you will be immortal. But we only actually see her say it once, and in this context, in the context of, if you only knew what the troubles you would go through, you would stay with me and you would be immortal. We don't know how often she had this conversation with Odysseus before. He doesn't seem surprised. He says something like, oh, goddess, and he sort of flatters her a little bit and says, I do know that Penelope is not a goddess like you, and you're a goddess and you're more beautiful, but I want to be human with her, or something like that, I want to be with her. And she accepts it. And she prepares things for him. And as Emily Hauser had pointed out in one of her interviews, she had said, it takes a long time to make a sail. And she has a sail for him, for the ship. So she had it prepared. This is not the sail that he had coming in, because that was ripped up. This is a sail she had. And then she says, I have tools for you, so here, let me give you your tools. And then she led him to the forest and said, here are trees that you can cut down to build a ship with. So he had never even bothered asking her, oh, honey, can I try out some of your tools to see if I can make a ship or a raft? He never even tried. He never tried. So, like I said, I had to think, what kind of Odysseus was there for 7 years with her? Someone who had totally given up already, who'd given her no signal that he wanted to take off, actually take off. I mean, it's one thing to say, I miss home, and she'll be like, yes, they're there. But another thing for him to go, I want to go, help me go. I feel like if he had said, I want to go, help me go, she would say, oh, okay, sure. But he didn't do that. And then, so she got everything ready for him, including provisions, food and drinks to go. And then she bathed him, and then they had sex again and spent the night together again. And this time, oh, by the way, and this time there's no coercion because she already said you can go, and I'm already helping you. So this is his choice. This is his choice now, right?
That's fascinating to think about. And who was the character you've most enjoyed getting into the head of that maybe they surprised you, or maybe it was just someone that, a trickster character or something, whose headspace has been most compelling to enter?
I really enjoyed going into Helen's head.
Mhm.
It's I would never have imagined how easy it would have been for me to do that. But when I decided I'm going to do a Helen song, it was surprisingly easy for me to get into. Whereas, as I said, it took years for me to even try to tackle Calypso. Um, Thetis, I would never have gotten into Thetis's headspace until I had a kid, and until I had a kid who almost died, you know. So that's an entirely different thing. But like when that happened, when he was 9 years old and he almost died, and it took a while. It took like a year before he was well. Um, I could, I could then sing Thetis's song about losing Achilles. Um, so
It's that sense of empathy that you talked about, where it's not just sympathy, it's actually understanding in as much as you can, whether it's that literal experience, God forbid, that type of thing that no parent ever wants to even come near, or spending time in their head and trying to say, okay, let's look at the text. What questions am I, how does it look to me that this character may be, what does it look like that they're behaving this way? And I think, is it difficult to sometimes rid your mind of other interpretations? Not to say you don't never consider them, but everyone may have, you've read so many different texts and interpretations as well as seen them and heard them that, someone's version of Penelope maybe or Helen might stick in your head. But so how do you ever find that difficult to sort of cast those preconceived notions aside? And how do you do that?
yeah, casting aside other people's interpretations of a character um, to sing one version of it is not difficult for me because I think I don't mind having conversations with people all the time about their opinions. So I suppose it's because I don't think people's interpretations are wrong. So I'm never trying to like make an argument. It's simply here's one version. So if you see it that way, it's just like, oh, I've heard your versions. What do you think of this version? This is one I came up with, and to me, it speaks the truth of this interpretation. What do you think? Uh, yeah, I guess that's why I don't at all mind like watching a movie whether I hate it or not. I'm just curious. Like, okay, let's see it. And I mean, I saw Nolan's Odyssey, and I thought, well, wow, there were choices, and I I don't approve of things like graying and beiging out beautiful, colorful
Yeah.
Greece, things like that. But it's somebody's vision, and I respect people's visions, especially when they've taken so much time to think about it. I
Mhm.
really appreciate it when somebody puts together an art form where they've really thought it through. So whether they're arguing something in a book, an analysis they made, it's like it's always interesting to me, and I hope that people at least give me that space as well when they hear my songs and they hear my interpretations. That oh, this is an interpretation, whether I agree with it or not. It is interesting. It is interesting, and I'd like to hear why she interpreted that way. And by the way, Carly, thank you so much for asking all these questions.
Pleasure.
Um,
It's
and,
fascinating
and and
your thoughts.
letting me, like explain things. For the Odyssey part of this album, I I purposely only picked passages where they are saying their own words. So there's no narration at all. It's directly their words. So when the sirens are singing their song, it's only them singing their words. And Circe, Calypso, Penelope, and Helen. And then Athena. Athena also sings for Odyssey 24 when she says, "Stop, stop the fighting." Okay. Those are her words. But for the Iliad part, I'm actually singing a little bit of narration and a little bit of their own voice, like Briseis, the whole Briseis passage. I think that was actually just her talking. But Thetis was Thetis and Achilles talking, and Achilles, Patroclus, and Briseis was another one. And then there's actually the one where Chryses is the one singing to Apollo for the plague to stop, you know. So for the Iliad, I had not just female voices, I had male voices. I did not tackle Odysseus because I don't like him that much, so I didn't want to do volume one with Odysseus. But by volume two, I feel like I'll be ready. I'll be ready to have a voice for Odysseus where I can be empathetic. I will. It will be a struggle. That is one person that it will be a struggle for me to find a specific spot, moment where I can actually say I empathize, not sympathize, but empathize.
Well, that's so interesting, and I would love to know, why don't you like Odysseus? Now, there are many reasons I can think of, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts as to why you feel that way.
First, I have to say why I admire him. I admire that he is a survivor. He has a very strong sense of trying to survive under any conditions. I am very uncomfortable with him being allowed to sleep with two beautiful goddesses, and poor Penelope was not allowed to even entertain the thought of marrying a suitor. And that's that's the writer or the oral tradition that did that. And but already, right away, that makes me so unsympathetic to him, because poor Penelope, and I think of all the female characters who loved him. Penelope loved him, and Circe loved him, or at least really liked him a lot, and Calypso loved him, and Euryclea, like his nurse, it's Euryclea, right? I keep getting them mixed up.
Yeah,
Anticlea and Euryclea. His mother's Anticlea.
I think so. Yes.
Okay. And his mother who loved him, and it's like, and Nausicaa was interested in him. All these women or female characters are into Odysseus, and I'm just like, what's so cool about him? Let's just take a moment. Why? What's so great about him? He is a hero of the Trojan War. Okay. He is intelligent. All right. He is, what else? What's so cool about him? He is not.
Complicated, as
Sorry, what's
some
that?
say. He said he's complicated, as some say.
Yeah, he's many-minded, as Joel would say, right? The many-minded man. One of my favorite books here. Um, he is many-minded. Um, is that something to love and admire? Is that somebody who's kind of scary to love? The goddesses are not scared of him because they're goddesses. Penelope is not scared of him, so she is crafty enough, perhaps, to handle him, or he's just never had reason to lie to her before. So, she didn't mistrust him in any way. His men distrusted him. That's another reason to not like him very much because of the reasons why they distrusted him. So let's talk about that. He does not tell them why he's keeping this bag of winds to him, and he doesn't tell them that it's a bag of winds, so that they're not trusting him. They're like, oh, he's hugging gold or something like that, right? And so let's try to open this bag of winds. What the heck made them distrust him so much at that point? These men who through all these years were with him and now are questioning him. So you have to kind of go back and think, what did he do? Well, when they wanted to relax in the land of the lotus eaters, and they had all had tough, a tough journey, he was forcing them to come back, and he didn't let them have their relaxing vacation. And I thought, well, no, I mean, at least let them have their drugs for a day or two. Let them relax for a day or two. I mean, is it really gonna hurt that much? Like, can you not drag them back the day after? So I wasn't really liking that very much. I thought they need a little break. The story didn't compel me. Didn't sound. It didn't make it sound as if the lotus eaters were dangerous. If it made it sound like it was truly dangerous, like once you eat, you will never, never, never remember or whatever, then I could see it from his perspective. But it's like it just made it sound like they will eventually forget, or they would just not want to. So that was kind of mean, I thought, and that's probably what they were thinking. And so that's number one. Wow, he didn't let us relax. What else? Number two, he had some bad judgment and people got killed along the way. Okay, I mean, that's just bad judgment. Got it. But they're hoping that he's smart enough not to make decisions like that. So he's not smart enough to keep everybody alive. So
Yes.
as
Oh.
Odysseus is supposed to be, he's not smart enough to do that. So he's failing. He's failing that. So as a faithful husband, he's failing. As somebody who's supposed to be so smart, how come his men are dying? So he's failing that too. So I don't understand in what way he's supposed to be someone I can truly, truly admire, except that he's a survivor. Well, is that really supposed to be the biggest reason why we love Odysseus? So I have to really search and figure out what the heck I'm supposed to like about this guy. So instead of like, why do I dislike him? Well, should I like him? I guess is the question.
That's a great point. And I think one of the other things that's so interesting about the Odyssey is we meet other survivors. Now, they had different trials and tribulations to go through. Helen, Penelope, Menelaus, are the characters that we see, Nestor, are survivors in different ways. And now that I'm thinking about it, there's something arguably more sympathetic about each of those characters. Right now, to be fair, none, at least not that we have, none of them has their own epic about trying to get home for 20 years. But at the same, so that, like, I could see the sympathy of that, of wanting to get home. But at the same time, as you very rightfully pointed out, he doesn't always want to go home. Or he doesn't seem to be always striving for that, or the best interests of his own men. And I think, that, there's a certain almost something not alien about him, but something that is thinks he's so clever, and he's so clever that he sort of inadvertently ends up, harming the people that he's supposed to protect. And I think that's really interesting also because, it is not only his job to get home as king, but his job to get his men home as king. He's their leader in war and in peace. And, one of the things, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the movie a little bit. And you mentioned that, again, there, as with any director or narrator or singer, there are choices made, right? One of the things I thought was really interesting is the choice of talking about Sinon and sort of the parents' grief from rather than, because we obviously, we see stories, we see Elpenor fall off the roof, we see Eurylochus up to all sorts of things in the actual story, and we get bits and pieces of, what it might have, who they might have been on Ithaca, but we don't obviously have those connections like we do with Anticlea or Laertes or anything like that. So that I thought was very effective of sort of, this person who did trust in him to be their leader, Sinon did trust and felt so betrayed. I'm curious, what were some of your other impressions of the movies where if it succeeded at all, if it really didn't? I know obviously there's lots of differing opinions, but I think, the one thing that does stand out to me is the point you were making about, it's one other person's interpretation, and creator to creator, that is something, really, you can see and acknowledge that we're also choosing to go your own way.
The Odysseus they wanted to portray was a faithful man. And Odysseus, in no translation ever, was faithful. Because, as I pointed out, Circe asked to sleep with him once, and he slept with her for a whole year. And the Calypso thing, we don't know what the heck happened, but we do know that the last night was his choice entirely. And at some point she did please him. So that was a choice for there to be no sex in Nolan's Odyssey. Nothing that tempted him. And Calypso, who was his therapist for 7 years, psychiatrist actually, because she is allowed to give him drugs. So,
oh, that's so fascinating. I never thought about that. She's, and then obviously we see him later with the Priestess of Athena character, sort of like his own projections of his own guilt. It makes me wonder also, was Calypso, how much of that version of Calypso that we see was his projection or not? Or anyway, please continue, but it just raises so many interesting questions.
oh yes, we'll get to Athena in a moment. So what we do see with Calypso, she says something like, and then we agreed to care for you. And she's like holding his hand. They don't even have like a kissy moment. There's no indication that they have any sort of like sexual anything. There's no kiss. There's holding hands. So that could be their besties, Okay, they're emotional besties. All right. For 7 years. And he forgot most of those 7 years. He, in fact, has no idea how long he was there for. So this is a man who's just so faithful that he knows somehow he can't be in love with her because something's holding him back. And as his memories come back, he's like, I have a wife. And she's like, oh yes, I've been waiting for you to bring that up. And now you can go. Like, okay. So that's one, the Odysseus as a faithful man, no. Okay, next, as I mentioned, the whole Greece as no color. No,
Yes,
because Greece is so colorful. The food, as Emily Wilson had said,
yeah.
the food does not look tasty. And when I think of Greece, I think of colors and tastes and sound. Here we go with the sound. Here we go. So the wonderful musician that they had did spoken poetry thumping, and I was just thinking, my goodness, please give Trevor Scott like a lyre and pretend that he just played it, or just pluck a few things. I mean, just a chord or two while he's saying his words, because when I think of Greece, I think of music. Everywhere you go, every taverna, every pub, you can hear music playing, and there was not this in the movie. You get background music of the aulos, and I couldn't even hear the lyre, but you hear voices. Okay, but actual people playing, they should have had people playing. It was mentioned we had two bards in the Odyssey. They could have had either one of them, playing, and the lyre was such a prominent instrument. Why? What was up with the choice of not having that? And whenever there's like happy people around, like, I mean, why wasn't, okay, given that the happy people happened in the Iliad more, and Aulis playing was actually in the Iliad, not in the Odyssey. This is an interesting thing
Oh,
because
interesting.
yeah, Aulis playing happened I think twice in the Iliad, where like in the background, the sounds of men piping and dancing, but none in the Odyssey. There wasn't that. However, you get two lyre players in the Odyssey book, but none in the movie. So it's like again choices. I don't
Yeah.
know. Um,
It does raise a lot of really interesting questions. And, I think like I was even thinking about, this the one real representation of food, barring when they cook the when they I'm sorry, when they roast the cattle at Helios, is of course the Circe scene. And again, this is referring to the movie, of course. And this isn't spoilers. I think everybody knows that they eat at Circe's house. But the way in which the food is so gray and like sloppy. Now, obviously, I think that is meant to be evocative of course, she turns them into pigs. It's like, sort of some of the messy food that pigs eat. But I was so hoping that we would get, like at least, or that, they're starving, so they would eat just about anything. But, they come into the, stagger into this cabin. I would have loved to have again seen like at least in their mind, like, that uh like in like Roadrunner cartoons or something when like someone's really hungry and they look like the Bugs Bunny turns into a hamburger in their imagination, something like that. I mean, not verbatim, of course, but something the ragged edges of their desperation and hunger would sort of gild um their perception of what was going on there, and maybe that again, all artistic choices that I think are choices. And I think that's now turning for a second to some more real life music. If you had to have dinner, this is a complete non sequitur, but I just had this question. If you had to have dinner or like maybe engage in a concert with three ancient musicians or poets, who would they be and why?
let's let's hope for a moment that Homer actually existed,
Yes.
because they had mentioned Homer. The contest between Homer and so and so. Um, and I do believe that there was a Homer of some sort who did sing a part of the Iliad at some point, and it was so well done that people remembered the way that he sang this small part, that everything is just done by Homer. I would have loved to hang out with Homer and just sort of just rapped with him, I mean, at least sing background to like just like go rap for me, Homer. I'll go with your dactylic hexameter. Let's go, and I'll be doing this part. It would have been fun. Sappho, amazing, amazing. Wow, poet and someone who thought through Homer's stuff, and she interpreted um, the Odyssey and the Iliad stuff, mythology, and she won competitions. And I think it's great that they didn't say, "Oh, she's good for a woman." They were just like, "No, she's great." Like hands down, nobody even questioned the fact that she's a woman. It must have been okay during that time, or in her island, or among people, or she was just so great that they were just like, yeah, she's good. She's so good. She's one of the muses. So I would just love to learn from her and ask her, oh my gosh, where did these ideas come from? Like, what made you decide to come up with that one? The poetry is just good. The imagery is good. Yeah, and then there's Karina from Viotia, or Boeotia, and she wrote about the mythologies of her own land. So that's cool, like local traditional mythology, and she sang it. So they didn't say if she played an instrument, which is interesting. Whereas with Sappho, you hear that she played with different lyres, different types, like three or four different instruments. But Karina, you don't hear that she sang with a lyre. Regardless, I would have loved to approach her and go, "Can I put your stuff to song, my lady?" Because I just love this so much. Um, yeah, I mean, if Phemius the Bard actually existed, I'm very curious. Why actually have the names of the bards unless they actually existed? Named after someone so famous that they had to put their name in. You know what I mean? Like that's is that Homer putting himself in there and saying, "Look how well they treat the blind bard," and see how they put a platter before him, and they yeah, it just seems like so much fun to act to. I really wish that there were a Homer. I mean, I really hope so. There's in the Homeric hymns. Um, Again, we have the blind singer. He's mentioned as the blind singer. Um, so it's a tradition that there is a blind bard going around singing mythology, and whoever he is, I would have loved to hear a couple of tunes that he had sung and play with him. Yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous. Well, that was all I had to ask you, but thank you so, so much for letting me pick your brain about your fascinating music and classical reception. And again, it's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Carly. Those are your set questions. Anything else you want to ask me?
It's interesting because actually those were, oh, started putting aside my set questions because the questions ended up flowing really naturally. The last one I remember because I really was like, I was really curious, like who would be your Hall of Fame, poets to sort of to collaborate with. But honestly, I was really just and sort of engrossed in the way that you develop character because I think, you know, so much of song again, I'm not a musician or songwriter, but I think so much of songwriting is obviously developing a character, but the way in which, most modern songwriters are not taking a famous character that's thousands of years old and not even trying to breathe new life, but trying to get in their head and understand them for a new interpretation, or not even, when I say new, I mean in your own interpretation. I think that is so fascinating, and as an editor, I think one thing I always try and understand in the past when I've edited fiction is to say, okay, what is the author's intent and how are they viewing this character, not just as a third party here, how am I coming into it? And I think the insight you gave into the creative process is, again, the same as that of any other writer, but it's so, the nuances that you bring and the different considerations you have. And again, choosing that one moment for Penelope, or again, that moment for Helen is so beautifully informed by the work the classical research that you've done, that I think, again, just really speaks to the level of care that you bring to the work that you do, which I really appreciate.
Well, thank you so much, Carly. And I mean, I've known you for years. I have admired your more than interest, but just the way you engage with everyone in the classical world. And I mean, just I know you mentioned that, but how you actually are involved in the classical world is with your own research. That I'd love to talk to you about that at another time, but your own
Sure.
research and how you are always interested in what everyone is doing and how that inspires you and moves you forward. That inspired me. That has always inspired me too. And you've been one of my favorite people because of that. Like it's just always been you're in this world, and you're in this one, the modern one, the reception one, but also in the ancient one. You're always thinking about how those two relate with each other and what everybody else is doing with those relations, and how to make a conversation and engage other people in these topics, and see the world as one, the ancient, the history, and the modern one coming together, and that we're in it. We're in this one with
And I
everything that happened in the past and everything that's moving forward, and how we have to keep talking about these things,
and
all the
I
time.
and I think the way, and would love to talk more about that at maybe in a future chat. Hopefully, one of the things that I sort of in my own public scholarship in the past have to sort of branded myself as like halfway between the armchair historian and the archaeologist in terms of taking concepts and research and finding a way to not only explain them to maybe more of a lay audience, but also to make them engaging. And by which I mean they're already interesting in of themselves, but sort of say, okay, is there a concern we're having in the world right now? And how did, if there are examples of how figures in the ancient world dealt with that, what can we learn, not learn, or what does that even say about the universality of humanity to a certain degree or human experience, right? Now, I tried to sort of let that speak for itself, but it's, again, as you said, the same, many of the similar concerns or sort of yes, we ascribe other motivations to, would Odysseus have been thinking in terms of the way we think? No, but at the same time, we add, while letting that, the trying to let the words of the past and the evidence that archaeologists and scholars have spent years working on speak for itself. In my head, I always know, okay, I can see these connections here. Let me, present the evidence, and hopefully someone will not even have the same interpretation I do, Lord knows, but just, see that someone thought similarly or differently. And what does that say about not even the universality of humanity, but just humanity? And I think, at the end of the day, we're really, even, yes, we're talking about gods and deities, and gods and deities is the same thing, or mythological creatures or people. But again, as what drives the Odyssey is the so many human concerns. And I think that is still what's so captivating about the ancient world, is that you can see that and feel that in whether it's in your music, whether it's in letters from ancient Mari in Syria in 1800 BCE. And I think there's something to be said about the ancient world really still living.
Well, I think we'll have to end with that because that was beautifully said. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you,
Well,
Bettina. It's a pleasure.
thank you again, and looking forward to future conversations with you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Gotta say bye for now, but see you soon.